Thank you, Bob, for that wonderful introduction, and it's good to see you again. To the RIP John Germ, to the PRIP Sakuji Tanaka, to the PRID, or RID, excuse me, Karen Wentz. I like these initials. To the PRID, Bob Stewart, and to all of the Rotarians, I am excited to be with you today because we are engaged and involved in some of, if not the most important work that is taking place in the world as advocates, ambassadors of peace. And so thank you, Rotary International, for this wonderful opportunity to present here at the Presidential Peace Conference. And as the daughter of Georgia's most famous citizen, as well as Atlanta's most famous citizen and couple, Coretta and Martin Luther King Jr., I add my welcome to all of you to the city of Atlanta, which I always say is the greatest city in the world next to yours. All of our cities, no matter where they are in the world, are great because greatness lies within each and every human being that is on the face of the earth. God created us in his image and after his likeness. And he chose from one blood to place us in different parts of the world. And we form the collective of what we call humanity. And one day we're going to have to graduate to a place where we have a full understanding and we live as one human race. I want to say that the work that we are doing in the area of peace, as you know, is very challenging and difficult work. And let me also recognize my friend, Ambassador Peters. It's challenging work, but it's rewarding work. I remember one of the most important quotes that defined, described, and motivated my mother was found on the campus of the Antioch College where she attended in the 1940s. It was a statute of the founder, Horace Mann, the great educator. And inscribed on that statue were his words, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity. Humanity is under assault right now. And in many respects, we are not winning as humanity. But the work you are doing is certainly contributing to that of victory. We have to find a way for all of God's children to win. I know that many of you in this room are from all over the world, but for those of us here in the United States of America, we're right now in the midst of the NBA championship games. Some of you may be paying attention to it even while you will be here. at your conference and convention. But I was watching the game the other night, and go Warriors. I often tell people that there's a message in this game, and that's why those two contenders continue to come back to the championship. Because if we're going to win for humanity, it's going to take warriors and not cavalier people. But Kevin Durant said something very important. He said at the end of the game, he said, we can't win this thing unless we do it together. We can't win against poverty, the triple evils my father called poverty, racism, war, and militarism, unless we do it together. And in his book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, and I believe we may have copies of that with us today, but we have some of his books available after this. I will be doing a book signing, and there's so many other products. My mother's latest book on her love, entitled My Life, My Love, My Legacy. But he said something that's very fundamental to creating what we at the King Center are devoted to, which is a just, humane, and peaceful society. And doing that through my father's philosophy and methodology of nonviolence, which we call Nonviolence 365. But he kind of echoed the sentiments of Kevin, or maybe Kevin echoed his sentiments, since he said these words in 1967. He said, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or together we will perish as fools. Learn to live together or perish as fools. And so just for a few moments, I want to talk about the we factor, because I think the we factor is so critical to the work that we are doing in the world. In the first place, we have to overcome and help our world to overcome the me syndrome in what my father called this world house. Understanding that what I want in my life, I should want the same thing for everyone else, irregardless of where they live and who they are. Overcoming that me and my factor. Oftentimes in a world where we are driven by self-centeredness. And my father said, what self-centered men have torn down, have created, other-centered men must build up. And so the we factor also understands that we are truly interconnected and interrelated. I love it when my father talks about that. He puts it in the context of a interconnectedness and an interrelatedness that we cannot escape from. He says we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, and what affects one directly affects all indirectly, and I, Bernice, cannot be all that I ought be until you are what you ought be, and you can never be what you ought be until I am what I ought be. And so if there are individuals and people in different countries and in different regions of the world who are not winning, who are suffering under exploitation and oppression, who are starving, who don't have clear, clean drinking water, who don't have adequate housing, who don't have livable wages, who are terrorized by militants or are terrorized by disease, then until that person is all that they can be, we are not all that we ought be, because we're living beneath who God created us as humanity. And so we have to not just understand this notion of interconnectedness, we have to practice it. We have to examine our own hearts. Because in a real sense, peace begins with me and within me, within my thoughts, within my heart, within my emotions. And if I don't fully understand and accept and practice in my daily life that which reflects a care and a compassion and an understanding of this interconnectedness, then I have to keep working on it. The work that we do requires that we not just look out of a window at the world's problems and issues and address the injustices and the inequities and address even working with people who need to transform, but it also means looking constantly in the mirror. And so it's window and mirror work at the same time. We must adopt this practice on a daily basis so that we guard against becoming the very thing that we are pointing out as a problem in the world that we live in. It's very difficult to stay true to ideals and the values of peace. And in this world today, nonviolence. When there's so much violence and there's so much hate and there's so much turmoil and there's so much tension. But if we hold true to these understandings of the interconnectedness, we can make sure that we are not contributing to the problem. So we must realize our interconnectedness. We must overcome the me syndrome. And we have to do this because we're so divided now. Our world is divided into too many camps. And we're defining ourselves by too many different labels. Labels sometimes that cause us to draw a line in the sand. Many times we find situations where people won't connect with one another because of how they identify. In our country, there's a whole line drawn between parties. We don't want to be with Republicans if we're Democrats. We certainly don't want to work with them if there's something that they believe. A lot of times, we won't connect and have the same care and compassion. We don't want to work with Republicans, Democrats, Republicans. Sometimes we don't want to work together across religious lines. There's just so much division and labeling, and we have to get to a place where we don't merely define people by labels, but we really define and deal with people as human beings. We must deal with people as human beings first and foremost, and not be dismissive of people where we may have some form of disagreement. Those of us who do this work in peace have to be the individuals who help to bring that kind of understanding to our world. Because there's something, remember what Daddy said, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters. Recently, we had a forum of sorts at the King Center called Beloved Community Talks. It was actually on the national holiday of my father this year. And we brought divergent voices together. There was one panel, because it was 4 different panels that evening, where there was a former member of the Ku Klux Klan, a black gentleman, and myself. Now, I know people in my community who would never be on a stage with an individual who had any dealings, even if it is past, who's a member of the Klan. But one thing that I learned, not just in sitting there, but engaging with the gentleman, the black gentleman that was with him, is that the only way we are going to find and create peace in this world and coexist peacefully is that we have to learn people's story, how they got to where they are in terms of their beliefs and ideologies. We make a lot of assumptions going into situations, and there are a lot of buzzwords, and if we hear them, we automatically write people off, and as I said, dismiss them. But this gentleman, along with 25 other members of the Klan, had turned their lives around. This black gentleman dared to do what my father challenged us to do. He dared to learn how someone could have that kind of mindset and then translate it into action. In fact, he said, I want to connect with them because I want to know, how can you hate me when you don't know me? And that's just it. My father said, people hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they're not connected to each other. We've got to help the world connect. People in the world connect. And we have to learn and pay attention to each other. And so this black gentleman was able to get 25 members of the Klan to turn over their robes to him denounce the Klan, and lead an entirely new life. And I know many of you have been out in the fields and have seen these kinds of transformations. And so you know the value. But for people who have not yet understood the value of our interconnectedness, it's very easy to write that kind of person off and not even give them an opportunity to change. And so I thank God that there are people who understand that we can't do that. Our world deserves so much more. So, with that in mind, with the we factor, we also need to re-explore, maybe not in this room, but re-explore around the world together the definition of peace. Because sometimes people think that peace means just stopping the wars. We can stop all the wars today. We can no longer have physical direct violence today. But that does not mean that we will have peace in the world. And so for me, the absence of conflict does not mean peace. That's what you call a false or a negative peace. That's what my father found when he went to Montgomery and Birmingham, Alabama in the movement. Yes, there was this notion that people were okay because there was no speaking up and no people who were raising issues, and it was pretty quiet. And so when he came, Montgomery and Birmingham, Alabama, we called it disturbing the peace. We get along here. But no, that's the danger of that kind of definition, because at some point, oppressed and marginalized people are not going to remain quiet and happy with their condition. One day they're going to rise up and manifest their yearning for freedom. And so we can't just work on one hand to rid ourselves of the violence and the war. We also have to deal, as you are doing in so many instances, with the conditions that create unfair and unjust and inhumane circumstances. Sometimes people are moving so rapidly in this world, we're not paying attention to those kinds of things. We figure everything is well over there because it's quiet. People are going about their business. I remember when I was over in Moscow, Russia. I think it was back in 1985. Very quiet. People going about their business on a daily basis. This was before the fall of communism. Someone like me, just upon looking at it, would assume that all is well. But no. The essence of what communism represented was oppressing people's freedoms. Therefore, there was no real peace. So true peace, and this is a quote that you should just keep tweeting out. True peace, as my father said, is not merely the absence of tension, but it is the presence of justice. And sometimes conflict is necessary to bring about that peace. There are what my father calls the creation of creative tension to bring to the surface the issues or the injustices or to expose those issues or injustices. And so conflict is not necessarily always a bad thing. Sometimes it's a necessary part of the change process. So we need to explore and get on the same page. And that's what made my father's movement effective. They had a shared philosophy. So we need a shared philosophy in the world that we work in. And I just believe personally that Dr. King's philosophy and methodology, and I'm biased, I recognize that. I am his child and my mother's child. But I believe it is the more excellent way to creating the beloved community and a peaceful world community. He said shortly before he was assassinated, I suggest that the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence become immediately a subject for study and for serious experimentation in every field of human conflict, by no means excluding relations between nations. That philosophy and methodology is something that helps us to understand the importance of the we factor. That every member of our world society, even our adversaries and our opponents, are worthy of being looked upon with dignity. And I know that's hard for most people. In that philosophy, it's a win-win philosophy. It does not seek to defeat people, but its focus is on the issue and the injustice. And so you're seeking to defeat the issue and the injustice. And that's why I'm going to say that I have a very serious problem in our today's society, when the goal of some people is just to spend their time and their attention on ousting and defeating a Donald Trump. I have problems with his policy, but I always have to remind myself that my goal is not to destroy or defeat a Donald Trump, but the goal in the end is trying to find out how you win people over and not win over people. I know that's hard to clap on with a Donald Trump. Now, does that mean that you always leave people in a place where they're harming and hurting and destroying people? No. But it means that your motive can't be that. Your goal can't be that. Your goal has to be greater and bigger than that. Your goal has to be to create a just and a humane and peaceful situation. And your goal ultimately has to be reconciliation. When you have reconciliation at the heart of what you do, you approach every situation differently because you see that particular person as worthy of redeeming. No one should be out of the realm of the possibility of being won over, transformed, and redeemed. And sometimes it means, and this is part of this philosophy, that suffering and sacrifice is the price that some people will have to pay for that purpose. The price that John Lewis paid on that bridge in 1964. No, he had no idea when he was on that bridge what the future held. But in his heart, he knew that the sacrifice that he was making would one day pay off. Maybe not even for him, but it will pay off for this world house and for other people. So unearned suffering is redemptive. And he's a perfect example of that. Because while he was getting his head beat on that Selma bridge, that Edmund Pettus Bridge, God was preparing a season for him to become a U.S. congressperson, serving under the first African-American president in the United States of America. Unearned suffering is certainly redemptive. Then we need I talked about a shared philosophy. A philosophy that also understands there's a methodology, that sometimes it's important that we spend time gathering information and really educating ourselves. Too often people are hasty to go into situations with direct action without even doing the necessary groundwork of gathering all of the information on every side of the equation, and then ensuring that everyone is educated and informed about what's going on. We make a lot of assumptions in the world. We even use words that we think everybody has the same understanding, such as racism, such as equality. We throw these words out loosely, and justice, assuming that what I'm saying and meaning by justice is what you mean. And that's why it's important that we spend time gathering information and educating ourselves, and then being personally committed to a process where we refuse to entertain any forms of violence, whether it's internal or external violence. And knowing that sometimes the road to change may be, as they know at the Carter Center, through negotiation and not necessarily through direct action. So before we get to the direct action, sometimes we have to sit down and let's reason together. That was happening when my father was in leadership. People saw marches and demonstrations, but they did not realize that they had already been meeting at the table trying to negotiate some of the changes before they went to boycotts and demonstrations. And those are critical steps. And then today, it's important that we have a coalition of conscience. A coalition of conscience. This coalition of conscience that we have understands that our loyalties are not just to a particular group or a particular nation or a particular tribe or a particular party, but our loyalties transcend those things. Our loyalties are a commitment to humanity as a whole. A coalition of conscience that understands we have to include everybody as we come together around those things that we have consensus on and determine our common values so that we can move forward to address those conditions that are causing the absence of true peace. The coalition needs to look at key areas. It must bring together people from all arenas and walks of life. I've often wondered why it seems, and I could be wrong, but why it seems that most of the people who are part of the work of social justice, the work of peace building, peace making in our world, are usually more progressive and liberal minded. That has disturbed me a long time. How do we win those who may not be liberal minded and progressive so that we can win together? It's just a question that I raise, because the coalition of conscience has to include that. We have to lay down whatever arms we have against each other, not physically all the time, and really join forces as people of conscience and help to raise the consciousness of other people. And then finally, we factor. We still have a choice today. We still have a choice between nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. We have a choice. We have a choice between nonviolence or non-existence. It really means we don't have a choice. There's really one choice. It's the choice that many of you have made. As Rotarians. Because our world will not survive if we don't choose nonviolence and community and line up everything we do around that. We have to make daily decisions that keep these things in mind, that we are interconnected, that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice, that I can't just be focused on my area of the world, because what I do in my area of the world ultimately does impact others in the world. That we have to have this shared philosophy. That's what made them successful in the 50s and 60s, because they held on to this shared philosophy together. And so since we chose to coexist. Then I leave you with this story. It's about a man and a woman who passed. An angel visited them and took them to one side of the universe. And there they saw this huge banquet table. And in that kingdom, there were all kinds of foods that the mind could imagine from all over the world. The people were very strange, though, and peculiar as they sat around this table with all of this delicious food. And the man and the woman asked the angel, why, with all of this food, the people seem to be so inept? They seem to be lethargic and lacking in enthusiasm. And the angel said, hey, there's one law in the entire universe. Quickly rushed the man and the woman off to another kingdom on the other side of the universe, and there saw the same banquet table, the same foods laid out, same exact ways. And I want you to know they had this section that had portobello mushrooms, tofu, and sprouts for people who were vegetarians. Quinoa. But these people were different. They had the laughter and the enthusiasm and the joy and the excitement and the mobility of limbs. And the man and the woman backed up and said, wait a minute, what's the difference in these two kingdoms? And the angel said, there's still but one law in the entire universe. And they were a little troubled, but the angel, seeking to address their puzzlement, said, this is the law. You must use the utensils provided by the management. But these utensils were 10 feet long. There were 10 feet forks, 10 feet knives, and 10 feet spoons. And the angel said, you see, in this first kingdom where the bodies were frail and there was no mobility of limbs and there was no enthusiasm and no forward moving progress, they took those 10 feet utensils and they were trying to just feed themselves, and they were literally starving to death. But he said, you see, the angel said, you see, in this other kingdom where there was excitement and they were exuding joy and they were encouraged and they had mobility of all their limbs, they decided to do something different. They decided to take those same 10 feet utensils and reach across the table and feed each other. My brothers and sisters, the work that we are doing is so critical to this world, to the survival of this world, to the continuation of this world, to the elevation of our very humanity and the salvation of our humanity, that we cannot exist in our silo in the work. We got to reach across the table and begin to feed other people and educate other people and win other people over and bring it all together so that we all can feast at this table called humanity and the world house, and that we all can have an opportunity to have the freedom to prosper in life, the freedom to peacefully coexist, and the freedom to participate in our society. And when we do that, when we reach across and keep encouraging other people to reach across the very things that divide and separate us and find a sense of oneness and unity as a people and as humanity, then we will be in a position where we can be like my Father and say, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are all free at last. So walk together, Rotarians, and don't you get weary in your work. Work together, Rotarians, and don't you get weary in your work. Hold on to each other together, Rotarians, and reach and connect and coalesce with others that are working in the same area. And don't you get weary. Fuss, fight, argue, but you better get over it together as you do your work. I'm going to say this because I believe it's important. Please, whatever means or way that you do it, meditate and pray together, because you will get weary if you don't. So walk together. Don't get weary, because one day, we will be able to live in a world that's free of poverty and all of its offsprings, racism and all of its offsprings, war and militarism and all of its offsprings. And then we will be able to affirm that we won a victory for humanity. God bless you.